Welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
It was early evening, and I was on a packed 19 bus in London, standing over a young man and a young woman. They were sitting beside each other, both gazing at their smartphones. Nothing unusual about this, of course. They were both attractive, smartly dressed, professional-looking, around the same age. Willfully invading their privacy, I subtly angled myself to see what they were up to on their phones. They were each on dating apps, reading the profiles of men and women who presented as extremely similar to the two of them. Our bus, completely true. Our bus reached Piccadilly Circus, and both happened to alight at this stop. I watched the two of them as they walked away from each other, one towards Shaftesbury Avenue and the other towards St James's. I don't need to labour the point of what I witnessed with this couple never to be. They were side by side, both seeking companionship or love, but they didn't even register each other's existence. Social media is described as a great connecting force, and it can be a wonderful thing. But when we stop noticing people in our immediate surroundings in favour of the swirling masses online, I don't think of it in quite such a warm, fuzzy glow. Whether it's my young couple from the bus, teens alone in their bedrooms glued to hours of futile or dangerous rubbish, parents scrolling on their phones while their babies try in vain to catch their eye, or toddlers given Siri voice companions in nurseries, none of these newly acquired habits seem to bode well for our collective spiritual flourishing. The disintegration of adult society and the loneliness of our elderly population is bleak enough, but the digital destruction of childhood is a crisis we must face if we're to have an alliance of remotely functioning citizens, let alone responsible ones. I first became interested in the topic of screens and children a few years ago when I was made patron of the education charity School Home Support. I visited schools up and down the country, and too often I saw children distracted in classrooms, yet silent in playgrounds. Screens were taking their attention away from their teachers during lessons and away from each other during break time. I also observed children in general becoming a different species. The raucous exuberance of youth was being replaced with an anxious, irritable insularity, which was disturbing to see. From a personal point of view, I know that if I'd had devices in and out of the classroom, I would have bombed academically. I'd have been constantly distracted, thrilled by all the garbage available online. I wouldn't have read any books, and I'd have got up to goodness knows what on my various machines. Our household landline was quite derailing enough. Looking back, I cherish the very analogue form of education that I received, and the very human connection with my beloved teachers. It's been one of the greatest gifts of my life, and I want all children to be able to focus, to acquire knowledge, and to achieve their maximum potential. I think that should be every civilized society's aim. But the evidence shows that we have already put this gravely at risk. We left the doors to our children's classrooms, their bedrooms, and their minds wide open to the world. Perhaps we thought we were giving children the right to access everything which might be good out there, but instead we've given everyone else, the good and the bad, access to our children. Let's consider some facts and figures. As illustrated in Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, the great rewiring of childhood is causing a plague of mental illness in our children. In the decade up to 2020, the suicide rate for younger teens increased by 167% among girls and 91% among boys. Hospital admissions for children with eating disorders in the UK have risen sixfold in a decade, the contagious influence of social media cited as a major factor. And 2022 saw a 500% increase of self-harming among teens over the past 9 years. In a British study last year, researchers found that 1 in 3 children are now short-sighted. Myopia is predicted to affect nearly 1 billion children around the world by 2050. Too much screen time is the culprit, with blue light harming developing eyes, not to mention interfering with children's hormones and their sleep rhythms. Spending time outside can be preventative for myopia, yet screens suck children indoors more than in any previous generation. Recently, the technology regulator Ofcom reported that a quarter of British children under the age of 7 have a smartphone, increasing to 97% of 12-year-olds. This mass buy-in to smartphones is resulting in a lost and deeply damaged childhood, with screen addiction displacing nearly every wholesome activity you can think of. As Douglas Gentile puts it, time spent on screens is time not spent elsewhere. A healthy childhood should involve lots of free fun, drawing, running, reading, writing stories, make-believe, kicking a football around, even just staring out of the window and wondering. These are all halcyon images in a sepia tint because they scarcely happen anymore. Health professionals for safer screens recently issued guidance that 11 to 17-year-olds should have no more than 1 to 2 hours screen time per day. This includes everything: iPads, school laptops, smartphones. It's all just screen time to the brain. And yet, children aged 8 to 18 are on average spending 7.5 hours per day on screens outside of school hours. Out and about, the reality is starkly visible. The number of toddlers subdued by screens on public transport when they'd be perfectly happy looking at the strangers around them, the dogs on leads, the opening and closing doors, is to my mind tragic. This unthinking crossover from the analog to the digital is resulting in heavily impaired speech, cognitive development, and emotional regulation. How will children so constantly but artificially stimulated ever learn to think, imagine, create, or just be still? The short answer is that they won't. Excessive consumption of screen-based technologies is damaging developing brains in ways too seismic yet to fully comprehend. The battle on the smartphone front is being waged with ever more power, thanks in no small part to Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt, who've established that the harms of a front-facing camera, addictive social media platforms, and 24/7 dopamine ignition are incontestable, from the damage to focus, to self-esteem, to deep thinking, to the ability to read books, to be patient, to sleep well, to interact healthily in real life, to think of others as opposed to one's own brand, to pure opportunity cost. The list is relentless. And these harms are at the more minor end of the...
All right, Revo Report. I'm Vince Revo, and this talk really struck me. We live in a hyper-connected world, don't we? A world where, as we see in this video, with the bus anecdote, with all these facts, two people can be side by side, inches apart, yet galaxies away, lost in the curated realities of their smartphones. But before we start patting ourselves on the back for our superior analog childhoods, let's not forget, as the old Winston Churchill once quipped, indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Are screens the worst thing? Are they a waste? A cancer? Maybe, maybe not. But let's not be naive about the subtle and not so subtle ways these glowing rectangles are rewiring our brains, and more importantly, the brains of your children, the brains of the future generation. The disconnect is real. It's physical, it's mental, it's psychological, sociological, and more importantly, it's spiritual. And as this video so starkly points out, screen addiction is displacing wholesome activities that a lot of us adults grew up being a norm. This isn't just about kids not playing outside. It's about a deeper disconnect. The Bible tells us in Matthew 6:21, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What are our children treasuring? The fleeting validation of likes and comments, the endless stream of digital entertainment, or are they treasuring genuine human connection, the beauty of God's creation, and the pursuit of knowledge? We need to get real about this spiritual battle here, because at the end of the day, it is a spiritual battle that manifests in the form of the digital. The enemy wants to distract us, to isolate us, to steal our joy, and to keep us from fulfilling God's purpose. A.W. Tozer wisely said, "A whole generation of Christians has forgotten the art of knowing God." How can we expect our children to know God if they're constantly plugged into a world that actively distracts them from Him? Or if AI is their God? Or if that influencer or that celebrity is their God? And statistics back this up. Studies show a correlation between increased screen time and decreased empathy in young people. Are we creating a generation of psychopaths? We're raising a generation that's losing the ability to connect with others on a human level, to feel their pain, to share their joys. And this is a tragedy. And it is, unfortunately, a direct result of our failure to prioritize real life relationships over digital superficial ones. Think about the implications for the church. How can we effectively minister to a generation that's emotionally stunted and spiritually malnourished? We need to be proactive to teach our children the importance of balance, of moderation, and of guarding their hearts and minds from the constant onslaught of digital noise.
Spectrum. The enhanced facilitation of knife crime, the enticement to radicalization and terrorism, and the repulsively violent porn. These horrors are globally recognized, yet still readily available on children's phones. Some lawmakers around the world are taking action to limit social media for under 16s. Bravo to Australia for taking the first stand. All civilized countries will surely follow suit as a matter of urgency, in a fashion which protects children without impeding and controlling adults' freedoms. And this is very important. Adult freedom and child safety can and must be symbiotic. Some parents do everything in their power to mitigate screen harms at home. But then their children go to school and they experience hours of screen time in the guise of educational technology, or EdTech. Whether that's in the form of iPads and Alexa voice assistants for nursery school children, learning systems like PowerSchool in primary school, or Google Classroom on secondary school devices, who has proven that this deluge of screen education is what's best for our children? No one has. If we step back and view this state of affairs through a compassionate lens, it's fairly understandable. Let's wave aside the fact that only 7% of UK EdTech companies have conducted randomized controlled trials, and just 12% have used third-party certification. Let's put these pesky facts aside. At the beginning, these products seemed future exciting. Well-intentioned schools spent fortunes buying and implementing the latest software and trained their teachers in how to use it. And some of the tools, like no more marking, have been helpful for teachers. But now we have better data on how tech is impacting pupils. So we must press pause and, in many cases, rewind. The Karolinska Institute in Sweden recently published research concluding that there's clear scientific evidence that tools impair rather than enhance learning. Sweden has taken note and been the first country to kick tech out of the classroom, reinvesting in books, paper and pens. They had the courage to admit that EdTech was a failed experiment. Bill Gates himself said that devices have a lousy record in the classroom. Mark Zuckerberg went to a tech-free school in Boston. Steve Jobs didn't let his own children use iPads. UNESCO says moderation should be the key word relating to classroom tech use. OECD found that most EdTech has not delivered the academic benefits once promised, and that students who use computers very frequently at school do a lot worse in most learning outcomes.
That's a powerful case that schools are often complicit in this digital destruction happening to our kids. We're so eager to embrace the latest technology to appear modern and innovative that we've blinded ourselves to the potential harms that really haven't been studied. And as she highlights here, studies are now showing that EdTech often impairs learning rather than enhances it. So why are we pumping our kids full of this digital junk food? We need to ask ourselves, are we prioritizing education or are we prioritizing the profits of tech companies? Look at Bill Gates, look at Zuckerberg, look at Steve Jobs. And I don't think we're necessarily just talking about academics here. It's about character development. I believe it was Martin Luther that said, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer. Where is the space in our children's lives for quiet reflection, for contemplation, for developing the kind of moral compass that will guide them through life's challenges, to teach them to pray when they're frustrated, to read the Bible when to look for guidance? The Bible warns us in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Are we truly training our children in the way they should go when we're constantly bombarding them with screens, with games, with entertainment? We need to be intentional about creating environments where they can develop character, where they can learn to think critically, learn self-control, delay of gratification, and where they can cultivate a love for learning that extends beyond the digital realm. The church must rise. And this is where the church comes in. We can't afford to sit on the sidelines and watch these digital crises unfold. We have a responsibility to equip parents, to educate our children, and to push back against the harmful influence of screen culture. Sunday schools need to be more than just Bible stories and crafts. They need to be equipping kids with the tools they need to navigate the digital world with wisdom and discernment. We need to teach them about the dangers of addiction, the importance of critical thinking, delay of gratification, self-control, the value of real life relationships. We need to raise them up as future leaders of the body of Christ. Billy Graham once said the greatest legacy one can pass on to one's children and grandchildren is not money or other material things accumulated in one's life, but rather a legacy of character and faith. We need to be intentional about instilling in our children a love for God, a passion for truth, and a commitment to living a life that honors Him. The Bible tells us in Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And this isn't about just setting rules or enforcing discipline. It's about creating a home environment where our children feel loved, supported, empowered, and encouraged to grow in the relationship with Jesus Christ. And this is a call to the entire body of Christ. We need to be informed. We need to be proactive. We need to be bold in our efforts to protect the next generation from the harmful effects of too much screen time and screen culture.
Test scores in maths, science and reading are plummeting. I've personally spoken to teachers in British state schools who've acknowledged that classroom tech has hampered the progress of many of their pupils, and the huge boom in tutoring among private school children points to the fact that they're not learning well in school either. So why are we getting so overexcited about EdTech here in Britain? Why are we outsourcing executive function skills to a computer? Why are we allowing exam boards to take every subject online by 2030? All the emerging research should generate a pulling up of the drawbridge rather than the open-armed embrace that we're seeing. There's currently talk of AI being pumped into our classrooms, with children's data being harvested to better improve the AI. Why? The fact that AI will soon outperform humans in many areas means schools should be backing away from the neurological junk food of digital learning, alert to the fact that it's counterproductive to learn anyway on one instantly aging system, and teaching their pupils the deeply human skills which AI will have a harder time replacing. The skills of reading about and getting to grips with the human condition, empathy, concentration, eloquent and humorous discussion, and creative expression. The neurology specialist Christina Capel explains that the brain is like a muscle which needs to stay fit with sustained focus and deep thought. Online learning encourages a short circuitry which damages the mind's ability to focus, rendering it flabby, needy, twitchy, and easily distracted. Reading a book, in contrast to all that stimulation, all the bells and whistles of a tablet, then feels like a leaden, demanding, and deeply unattractive prospect. The standard defenses of convenience and having to be au fait with the modern world are crumbling as progress rates dive downwards. Plus, digital literacy is a very different beast from digital dependency and atrophy. The literacy can be taught in IT lessons without contaminating every other subject. Easy questions such as, why is cutting and pasting some information from Google into a PowerPoint superior to reading a passage in a well-researched textbook and handwriting a response? Why is homework listed on Microsoft Teams better than jotted down in a paper homework diary? Why is digitally transporting a child to the Egyptian pyramids better than that child imagining it? This kind of jazz hands immersion as an engagement tool doesn't work. It negates the need to imagine, rendering the pupil a passive rather than an active learner. Parents such as myself ask these questions, but we do not get answers. As the educational psychologist Dr. Jared Horvath has said, the question isn't what's the best way to take arsenic, but should we be taking arsenic in the first place? That's him, not me. There's even no consensus that interactive smartboards are safe. They're insanely bright, they're radiation emitting, and they're simply not as effective as a teacher writing out what is in that second being explained on a black or white board. Yet, we seem to be marching into a world where screens are replacing books. EdTech companies are relentlessly flogging their wares to schools, very successfully too. The business of EdTech is now worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Teachers are having to submit to the new normal, and as mentioned, exam boards in Britain at least are threatening to go online for all subjects, which effectively forces the hand of the whole profession at once. So where is all this coming from?
Where is it coming from? Because we stand at a crossroads right now. We can continue down this path of digital dependence, or we can choose to reclaim our children's childhoods, to cultivate their minds, and to nourish their souls. The choice ultimately is ours, and we must speak up. But there is one ultimate truth, and none of this ultimately matters if our hearts aren't right with God. Jesus Christ came to offer us a life of freedom, a life of purpose, a life of eternal hope. He died on the cross for our sins. He rose again, and he's coming back to make all things new. Even if we've messed up with our children, he can still turn that into a masterpiece. And if we feel defeated, he's still in control of our destiny. And if we feel we've failed at some aspect, we know that God can turn that into fortunes. So if you're feeling lost, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the challenges of this digital age, the difficulties and struggles of parenting, I encourage you to turn to Jesus Christ. He is the answer. He is the way. He is the truth. And he is the life. So let's surrender our screens, surrender our fears, surrender our lives to him, and watch Jesus work miracles in our families, in our children, in our churches, and in the world.